Good evening, everyone. Chodesh Tov, and welcome to the US TV. I'm here in the studio together with Mr. Arnold Roth from Israel, who together with his wife Frumit, they lost a dear daughter in a terrorist attack nearly 20 years ago in Jerusalem. This evening I'll be interviewing him, and this is coming up to Yom Hazikaron, the Memorial Day, where in Israel and hopefully around the world, we remember those who lost their lives defending Israel and through terrorist attacks and murdered by terrorists, basically because we are Jews and because we are Jews living in Israel. Before we begin, to give some background to the interview and to Malki's story, we're going to see a short clip of the Malki Foundation.
Welcome all. I'm Eliav, speaking to you from the heart of Jerusalem. I could not be more excited to be on this journey with you. A journey of Israel. A journey that will tie us together forever and bond us for life. In this journey, we will meet and help not only the people of Israel, but the children of Israel. These kids have challenges that we don't have. They didn't ask for these challenges, they need our help. Do you know where I am standing? I'll give you a hint. The old city is that way. Tel Aviv is that way. Over here, this is where you can get the best shawarma and pizza in Jerusalem. Yep, we are on Ben Yehuda Street, on the corner of Yafo and King George. I want to give you a good idea on why this place is important. I want to tell you about Malki. In 2001, 17 years ago, there was a pizza place over here called Sbarro. Two young 15-year-old girls named Malki and Michal walked in to order a pizza on their way to their friend's house. But on that fateful summer day, a terrorist carrying a guitar case full of explosives walked into the restaurant and detonated his bomb. And Malki was killed. Her sweet life and that of Michal's was cut short, and all that knew her grieved of a beautiful life that was taken too soon. It's a very sad story, and I wish I didn't have to tell it. But I have more to tell you. Sometimes out of chaos and tragedy, something beautiful is born. Malki's parents chose to honor their daughter whom they loved so much by starting a foundation that will let her legacy live forever and help those who need it most. The Malki Foundation was started, and that's why we are here today. Malki's dad wanted to tell you a little bit more about the foundation.
Malki Foundation honors the memory of my daughter Malki, and the main reason why it exists is so that I can stand up in front of good people like you and say there was a person called Malki Roth, whose life ended when she was just 15, and she did wonderful things for disabled children in general and for her own little sister in particular. The work of the Malki Foundation exists in order to provide support for families just like ours, that is, a family that understands that a child with special needs will always do better if the family, a loving family, a supportive family, can care for that child at home. A child raised with the family, if the family is able to do it, is going to be receiving better care and almost always a better outcome. We provide support via the funding of therapies, non-medical therapies, physical occupation, speech, horse and water, and we have a terrific track record in providing equipment of the kind that families who have a special needs child living at home need, equipment that's expensive and that you need to change as the child grows. We're efficient, we know what's needed, and we do it really, really well.
We are on this journey together, and I don't know about you, but I am honored that you are a part of it. Do it for these kids. Do it for yourselves. Do it for Malki.
Welcome back, everyone. Once again, thank you for joining us, which will on this evening for what should be a very meaningful and thought-provoking interview together with Mr. Arnold Roth, the father of Malki Roth. Arnold, I'm going to ask you, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family? Give us some background.
I'm from Melbourne. Malki was born in Melbourne as well. Melbourne is unusual in that it's a community that was built by Holocaust survivors, and my generation is right in the middle of that period. My parents, like the parents of everybody that I know from that period of my life, arrived as orphans and started lives all over again in Australia around 1950. I married my wife Frimet after going to learn in yeshiva after I'd finished law school in New York. I finished law school in Melbourne and then went to New York. And on our very first date, Frimet asked me what my plans were for Aliyah. And I told her that I was interested in it and that it would take me some years to be ready for it. And she said, how many? I said, 7. And after 12 years, I kept my 7-year promise. So that 12 years after we got married, we brought our 4 children, 3 boys, and the youngest child, Malki, who was 2 years old, to Jerusalem. And I picked up the pieces here, became a lawyer, then moved on to become active in the world of technology, running a series of companies. And from it, my wife raised our children, and at a certain point, starting in 1995, the youngest of our children was born and had catastrophic problems from the age of 1. And Frimet has really devoted herself even more than she had until that point into looking after our family, looking after the children, and in particular, looking after our youngest, Chaya Elisheva.
So first of all, I'd like to commend you. My family made Aliyah many, many years ago. And till this day, we thank our parents for having brought us to this crazy land, but beautiful and homeland of Israel. For you to move from beautiful Melbourne, I heard that it's a very nice place to live. To move here with your family, definitely courageous, but I'm sure you never look back, and I'm sure you brought up your children to love this land as their own. Can you tell us about Malki now, a little bit more specifically? Let's focus on Malki and her story.
Malki was 2 years old, a little over 2 years old, when we brought her to Israel. She never left Israel after that. She was the first daughter after 3 boys, so there was a certain stamp that placed on her, but then there were 3 sisters who were born after her. And Malki became, as she described it, the meat in the sandwich. She was 3 older brothers, 3 younger sisters, and she had a special role. But that role evolved as our youngest, Chaya Elisheva, and her catastrophic problems became apparent to us. She was, and she is today, blind and unable to move her limbs almost at all, and is profoundly brain damaged as a result of complicated issues. Malki embraced that challenge in ways that surprised all of us, and that really put a very distinct mark in her life. She was all empathy and capable of turning her empathetic wishes and her outlook on life into very practical steps. So she became Frimet's indispensable right-hand man in the care of Chaya. That included spending long periods in hospital at her sister's bedside, along with her mother, sometimes along with me. And as she grew into teenagehood, she began translating some of the things she learned there into ways of reaching out to help people with special needs. And she became an agent of change in her own community, the community of children in her school. She was at the Chorev Girls' School here in Jerusalem, and in the community of the Ezra Youth Group, where she was a madricha, a youth leader. She was really quite a remarkable young lady, developing into something very, very special. And of course, as you know, that growth ended before her 16th birthday.
Truly, what a terrible tragedy. She sounds like she was a remarkable young lady, full of responsibility. She understood the test and the courage that was needed, and she rose to the task. And to have lost such a beautiful soul, I'm sure has affected the family. Can you tell us how, if you've ever thought about it, and I'm sure you and your wife Frimet have thought about it, how is it pre-Sbarro, the terrorist attack, when Malki was murdered, and how has it changed the family since? What has changed within the family, within your lives?
The only way to really tackle a question as big as that, which I'm going to answer obviously very briefly, is to first of all observe that it isn't that Malki sort of faded away, got old and ceased to be productive, and we needed to put her into an old people's home. Malki was 15 and a half years old when somebody blew her to pieces, along with a lot of other children and her closest friend, who was our next door neighbor's daughter. the shock of losing her, the shock of seeing that as much as our lives were turned upside down, the people who did this saw this as a triumph. I don't mean that in a figurative way, but in a literal way. As we learned later, the woman who orchestrated the attack on the Sbarro pizzeria in Jerusalem that day, the 9th of August 2001, was on her way out of Jerusalem immediately after she had placed the bomb. The bomb, of course, was a human being, a young man with a guitar case filled with explosives on his back. As soon as she placed him there and instructed him not to explode for 10 minutes so that she could make her getaway, she was already at Shar Shechem, the Damascus gate of the old city, and in a minibus on her way back to Ramallah, where she was the newsreader on the TV news that night. So that we don't need to speculate about the outlook on life that this woman had. First of all, she trumpeted it on the news that night. And then after she was arrested, she made it clear that she was not at all apologetic. She only regretted that she hadn't killed more people. She said it. She said it for the cameras. She said it to the court. And she said it subsequently because she was then released in the Shalit deal of 2011 and became something almost incomprehensible. She became an icon of terrorism, constantly boasting of what she did, repeating the claims that this was something good, something that came from heaven, something that other people ought to identify with and emulate, and repeating again and again the notion that this was something that the Zionists had coming to them. The attack on children was calculated to be an attack on children. The rationale I'm not going to lay out here because it's so offensive and so, frankly, it's obscene. But she was immediately a hero. She's gone on to become a bigger hero. She's a genuine celebrity in the Arab world, and nowhere more than in the country to which she returned after she was released in the Shalit deal, which is Jordan, which is where she was born and raised and had lived until a year or two before the attack.
I just like to, I'm speechless, even though I've lived here for 50 years, still how, and we all hear from around the world, these twisted acts and how they are justified. I just like to make sure that the listeners, the viewers understand the Sbarro restaurant that doesn't exist anymore now. It's that bakery, the Angel Bakery, where that lovely young man in the video clip pointed out where it was. Is that in East Jerusalem or in West Jerusalem?
It's in the heart of West Jerusalem. It's actually the cafe, the Ne'aman Bakery. It's right on the intersection of two of the busiest streets in the city, King George and Yafo. This was also deliberate. She has said for the cameras that she went scouting, looking for a place to bomb. She came into Jerusalem 10 days earlier and placed a bomb in another location in what used to be called the Mashbir, the big department store that isn't a big department store today. She placed an exploding beer can, which she brought with her on the shelf in the supermarket, and it failed. It fizzed. So she, in her second attempt at creating a catastrophe, came highly motivated, planned it perhaps better than before, and took all of the steps necessary to ensure that there would be lots of blood, lots of Jewish blood.
And all that's in pre-67 Jerusalem.
Absolutely.
So there are two actions or initiatives that you and your wife are involved in that has gotten you quite some wide attention. One is the work of the Malki Foundation, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more later on. And the other one is the campaign, sort of international campaign, that you and your wife are trying to bring pressure to bring this terrorist to trial, whether in Washington or anywhere else, for her role in the massacre. How do these activities affect you? How involved? How much time does it take up? And does it bring you comfort, these two different activities?
So allow me to just separate out those two parts of the narrative here and then try to blend them back together. The horror and shock of seeing the murderer of our child not just alive and free, but actually being given back her freedom and being celebrated became even more than what I've just said in February 2012, just a few weeks after her return to Jordan in the framework of the Shalit deal, when she was given her own TV show. That TV show was not a small thing. It was a global
satellite TV program beamed out to all parts of the United Kingdom and Australia and the United States and the Arab world and everywhere in the world where there are Arab speakers. For me, that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, because it was then, when that happened, February 2012, after the shock of the Shalit deal, that I realized that no one was going to stop this woman and no one was going to try to curb her freedom unless we did it. And at that point, I went to Washington. And I should explain that Malki had American citizenship. It's key to understanding why we've done what we've done. The American citizenship stems from the fact that I married an American woman. Fremen is an American. All of our children have American citizenship in addition to the other two citizenships that they have. I went to Washington armed with the knowledge that under American law, the Americans presume to do something that I don't think any other country on earth does, which is to say that if you, a terrorist, carry out an attack outside of the United States on an American citizen, and American citizens are killed, and there's a weapon of mass destruction involved, we have the jurisdiction. We will go there. We will arrest you. We will bring you to wherever we need to bring you and put you on trial on United States land, in the United States, under United States law. The meeting in Washington with the legal authorities, the Department of Justice and its various arms, had really two parts. One part was for me to get up there and say, there is this law. You've never applied it even once in the state of Israel, despite all of the Americans who've been murdered over the years in acts of terrorism. And I'm calling upon you to go after this woman. She's free. She lives in Jordan. And I made that claim. The second part of it was that there is a terrible injustice here. This woman has murdered 2 American citizens in the Sbarro death toll. A third American woman has been left catastrophically injured in a vegetative state in all the years since then. Families have been destroyed. Family life has been turned upside down. My own family is a good example. You must go after her. It took them 5 years to actually make the first announcement that they were prosecuting Tamimi, by which time she was already solidly famous in Jordan and operating on a global basis. Up until 2016, she was traveling all over the Arab world. There's a lot of detail here that I'm skipping, for instance, to explain why she wasn't traveling after 2016 gets us off into a different discussion, and this isn't the time to do that. So we found ourselves in a situation where things were moving terribly slowly, but in a direction that we wanted. We wanted justice to be done, not vengeance. We do not want somebody to walk up to her and put a bullet in her head, which is suggested to me, I would say once an hour, by various people who don't know me. That's not what we want. We want to see justice done. What happened when the charges were finally announced was totally shocking. The United States government sent a delegation to Jerusalem, which met with us in March 2017. They came to tell us that charges indeed have finally been pressed. They've been under seal for several years. And when we asked why have they been under seal, we were told in a rather vague way, but we understand it this way, well, we've been trying to induce the Jordanians to extradite her. Now, for anybody who doesn't know the meaning of the word, I'll just say it very briefly, that extradite is what happens when one country which wants to put a fugitive on trial asks the other country where the fugitive is living, hand her over. Jordan refused and has continued to refuse until today. At the point where I have to imagine the American authorities realized that continuing to badger the Jordanians wasn't going to get anywhere, they took it all public. They came to Israel. They told us that the matter was now in the court of public opinion and that we ought to do whatever. It was suggested that we ought to do whatever we can to create some greater awareness. And that's turned into almost a full-time pursuit. More for me than for my wife, since my wife is very caught up in caring for our youngest, who lives with us, who's now 26 years old, Chai Elisheva. But it's affected the lives of both of us. Now, in parallel to all of that, right after the murder of Malki, right after entering into this next stage of our lives, a life without Malki, and trying to cope with the idea that there are people around us who are delighted at having ended the life of a beautiful soul, we created a foundation in her memory. And that foundation is active. I'm the honorary chairman. We have a terrific small team, and it does wonderful work.
Do you find that the charitable work gives you more, helps you deal with the challenges of living with the idea that your dear daughter, was murdered?
It does, but in a way that I'd like to explain with a little bit of care. Chesed is really a uniquely Jewish concept. Everybody has charity. Everybody has good deeds. Chesed is where no money is involved. And usually it's where somebody is going to be benefited, and you're not necessarily the person who does it going to be benefited. It's a wonderful thing, not because of the good that it does, that's a good thing, but because it enables you to channel your energy and your grief and your anger into doing something that is constructive. If it's done in a constructive way, it's going to be bringing solace and a degree of comfort. And I can certainly testify to the fact that over the years, watching the Malki Foundation grow, working only with people who can't really solve their own problems, people who didn't invite the sequence of events by which a child of theirs, whom they love, became impaired in some way, damaged, disabled. When you step in with the sorts of things that the Malki Foundation does, which are basically providing therapy services and providing equipment, you're empowering them and you're enabling a better future for the child and often a better future for the family. Now, how could anybody do that kind of thing and not feel something stirring in their soul? Well, the answer is you can't. Once you do that sort of thing, it stirs the soul. And it also, at least in my case, because I'm a bitter and angry person, though it doesn't always come out, but it's certainly always there, I'm able to say to myself, this is one of the most important things that when I talk to myself, I really persuade myself, we're not like them. We're not like the monsters who sent Tamimi into the heart of Jerusalem looking for children. We're not like the leaders of the country across the river here, Jordan, who have turned this hideous barbarian into a national hero. We're not like the people who write articles on social media saying, yes, what she did was an act of resistance, of revolution, of assertiveness, of standing up against the... I can't even complete the thought. It's important sometimes when you're looking at yourself in the mirror, or even just figuratively thinking of yourself in the constellation of people among whom you live, that you're not the same. It's one thing to say, and I'm not ashamed to say it, we have a set of values and standards. My family lives according to Torah values. We have always recognized that it puts us in a position where there are things we need to do that other people don't need to do, and it's important for us to always derive meaning from all of this. Chesed takes us into a different place. When you're involved in Chesed, you've actually got the privilege of seeing good things going on around you, and that's a reminder how different that course is to, say, the video clips that many people watching this will have seen of the woman, of Tamimi, giving a smile into the camera and saying, did you say I killed 8 children? 8? Oh, 8. And gives a broad smile. Sometimes you need to remind yourself that there are monsters in the world and we're not among them.
So the Malki Foundation, setting it up, keeping it going, sustaining it, is that part of a larger picture or a larger project? I think there's something called Saved by Kindness, an initiative by you and your wife. How does the Malki Foundation fit into the Saved by Kindness initiative?
The Malki Foundation is certainly part of a larger initiative to try to sublimate awful things that have happened in people's lives into something positive. Malki was deeply involved in that herself. She didn't organize any charities or go out fundraising. Her devotion to the well-being of other people was really, certainly up until the time she was 14 or 15, focused on her own sister. Just spending time with a sister who doesn't speak, never spoke, can't move, can't voluntarily really do anything, and shower that person with love is really something special. I don't know that there's a better embodiment of chesed than what I saw in the life of Malki. And she influenced other people. She influenced her own siblings. She influenced the children in her school. She influenced the children in her youth group at Ezra to think about this. I'm sure she never used the word, but the transcendental effect of being involved in chesed. And for us, certainly for me, because I'm more involved than my wife is in the day-to-day. I'm the chairman of a thriving, although always in need of more money because we'd like to grow, charity. there's a lot of day-to-day activity that simply diverts me from some of the challenges of having to talk to idiot journalists or idiot politicians. I keep having the misfortune of dealing with people who are somewhat involved in trying to help us get justice done, but somehow that whole process keeps getting undermined by people from the world of politics and the world of the media.
If I can paraphrase maybe, or something at least that I've taken out of the beautiful words that you've said with much emotion and personal pain, is that I think many of us, many people, some take it harder than others, when call it dark clouds of depression, of evil in the world, when you recognize there's pain, there's evil in this world, when it's sort of threatening to descend upon us and maybe affect our lives, the more you see chesed, human kindness around us, gives us reason to be optimistic and hopeful. Is that a correct idea? Does that fit in with your?
Sure it is. Sure it is. And most of the time that I find ideas like that coming out of my own mouth, I'm talking to kids in school. Over the years, traveling for my work, I did a lot of traveling. I'd be away from my family far too much. I would always look for an opportunity to speak to school children and to talk to them about the example of Malki's life and the things that are being done in honor of her life. And the message that I've always tried to find the right words to describe has been that focusing on doing good in the world has a tremendous return on investment, not only in terms of the good that you do, but in terms of what it does to you yourself. It's not possible to end up being, well, I'd like to think this anyway, end up being a bitter and twisted individual if you're really focused on trying to do something good that will benefit people with whom you don't necessarily have any closeness, any interaction, only because of their need. You're addressing them because of their need. That's a fabulous thing. It repairs the soul. It repairs your outlook on life, and it gives you energy to keep going. Now, I've got to take a couple of steps beyond that. I'm not looking for any kind of an award or to become a saint of the Catholic Church. Nothing of the sort. What I do say is that this recharges my batteries. I'm involved in dealing with a lot of hard people, a lot of hard situations. It's an extremely frustrating place that I live in when I need to talk to members of the American legislature, the Congress, or politicians who are active in other parts of the American governance system, or to people who are in the media. The challenge is always the same. There's no one I've ever met in any of those encounters who says, well, Roth, you're wrong. You need to stop doing that because really this woman is okay and we don't want to see her brought to trial. No one says that. No one wants to go up against a father who sounds as if he's somewhat rational, but is affected by grief and loss. No one. So what we encounter a great deal is the most difficult pushback of all, which is silence. I cannot tell you how much silence we encountered from parts of the US government. And this is not a political statement. This is all entirely around the subject of justice. People who hear the words, look at me as if there's some calculation going on in their minds, and then just don't say anything. And since many of the people watching this will be familiar with that if they've read anything at all about the strange case of Ahlam Tamimi and her role in the Sbarro massacre, I'll say that the machinations of politicians can often be the exact opposite of doing good in the world, of doing chesed. It comes to something that I just mentioned a moment ago. They won't argue. They'll just be silent. And they'll be silent because the issues are complex. If we make this and this move against this and this government for this and this reason, well, this will have political implications, and heaven knows where that will get us. That is a kind of exquisite form of amorality that I have to admit I come up against all the time, and I'm getting less and less capable of dealing with it.
Well, I hope the silence stops. I'm sure many of the viewers and you yourself are aware of incidents or events that are taking place in Jordan at the time, the Kingdom of Jordan, where I think one of the anointed crown princes, I think his name is Hamzi, was appointed. He was supposed to be the heir of Abdullah, who's the king now, and Hamzi was appointed by his father. Hamzi has been critical of the regime, calling it, I believe, in the past, he's called it corrupt. The king himself is corrupt and the government is corrupt. So in view of all that's going on and the unrest, and he is under house arrest or he's not under house arrest, I assume other people have been rounded up for speaking out against the regime there. It has an image of being democratic and free. And that's the way I guess Britain would like to see it, as a baby or a creation of Great Britain. But will this help your cause? These events? Do you think that this will maybe put some spotlight on the corruption there, and therefore maybe they'll make a gesture? And I should say, it's actually, we're talking about the king. If he says give her over, she's gone. Is that the case?
So your last comment is the point at which I'll start. Jordan isn't like the United Kingdom. It's a family-run business. All the important decisions are taken in one bedroom. I'm using provocative words only to make the point that you have to drop any thoughts about a democracy or any system that any of us are personally familiar with. If the king decides that things are going to be done in a certain way, they'll be done in that way, irrespective of what other lawmakers or the Constitution. And I'm trying not to sound too authoritative, and I'm also trying not to sound too focused on Jordan per se. Our intention in trying to get justice done is not to focus on Jordan per se. Jordan is simply a country which voluntarily entered into a contract, it's called a treaty, with the United States. And that treaty calls upon Jordan to hand over fugitives whenever the United States asks for them. Without wanting to drill into the details, because most people's eyes glaze over when I get into the details, but trust me that I can bore people very easily on this. The Jordanians decided, when they were presented with a demand by the United States to hand this woman over so that she could be tried for very serious terrorism crimes in the United States, they decided that they would declare that the treaty, which goes back to 1995, and the revered and beloved King Hussein, the father of both King Abdullah and Prince Hamza, who you mentioned, Clinton and King Hussein signed a treaty. 1995, it wasn't easy to get it done, but it was done. It was driven by the first attack on the World Trade Center, which was in 1993, not the second one, which was in 2001. At the time the treaty was entered into, all sorts of formalities about which I happen now to know a very great deal for reasons that I cannot say in this program, but that I'm going to be publicizing in the next few weeks. And that treaty was put into effect, and in the fullness of time, the United States sent telegrams or WhatsApps to the government of Jordan, said, we want this fugitive and that fugitive and another fugitive. And each time the Jordanians did exactly what they should do, which was which flight. Then comes Tamimi. And without wanting to turn this into some sort of a superficial discourse on the problems of a country like Jordan, let it just be said that when Tamimi entered the picture, when she was famous because of the Jewish children she murdered, the Jordanians suddenly found reason to say no. But it wasn't good to say no, because how are you going to say no here? And you've just been saying yes and yes and yes over the previous years. So they said, well, because the treaty is invalid. It wasn't the government that said this, it was its highest court, the Court of Cassation of the Kingdom of Jordan. The Kingdom of Jordan's highest court declared 6 days after the charges were unveiled against Tamimi in Washington, announced that actually the treaty of 1995 is invalid and was always invalid from the day it was signed. There's a great deal of what you and I might want to call chutzpah in taking that approach. And I don't have any intention of persuading people in this audience as to whether I'm right or whether I'm not right about this. I only want to say that there's simply no doubt about the fact that the Jordanians handed over every fugitive that the Americans asked for right up until Tamimi. And then I want to add, without being too coy about this, that I happen to know on very good authority that the argument that there is no treaty is simply untrue. And we'll be demonstrating that I hope in the not too distant future. But then where does that leave us? There are so many people who haven't helped us try to bring this woman to justice. There are so many people, organizations, some of them are Jewish, some of them are human rights, some of them are governments who have been made aware of the exquisite awfulness of this Tamimi case and have said, oh, well, and went about their business. And I'm obviously summarizing something in which I'm deeply involved and about which I have a great deal of detail to share. But since I know no one is as interested in this as I am, I prefer to sort of skim over the top of it and say, I don't know where I would put myself if I were one of those people. And it turns out that they were wrong all along. And that this woman, about whom they sort of remained silent and folded their arms and looked the other way, if that woman turns out to be as guilty as sin and subject to an extradition treaty that was always in effect. I don't know what I would do with myself if I were one of those people, but that is people from the media, people from politics, people from leadership positions of all kinds, and that's where we're going. We've been pursuing this woman now since 2012, since right after the Shalit deal, and we're not about to give up. It's not a pleasant undertaking. It doesn't add any value to my family life, to my marriage, to my relationship with my children and my grandchildren, but it's something about which my wife and I feel really very determined. We have no doubt that we're right. We have no doubt that ultimately justice is going to be done, but we also have very little doubt that if we don't keep pushing, it's just going to not move forward.
Well, I hope that sane minds and we'll call it righteous people will stop some people that can actually do something about it, will push the Hashemite kingdom or the rulers there, the ruler, to do something about it, to give you justice and take a terrorist off the map. I'd like to go back to something, and I hope it's not too sensitive. I assume some kind of belief brought you, your wife, your family to Israel, and that's the way you've raised your children. So as Jews that have faith in our traditions and so on and try to practice that, being a victim of a terrorist act, has it raised any big issues for you, your wife, your family? It's sort of as a challenge to your Judaism.
I certainly feel that the answer to that is yes. And I volunteer the confession before I say anything more than that the questions that I have are a lot better than the answers that I have. And yes, it's certainly raised questions. Anybody who, anybody who's lost a child knows the utter helplessness that brings into your life. There's no coming to terms with losing a child. And it's not only the objective fact of someone who you love being murdered. It's also that in large measure, all of us are wired, I believe in that word, we are wired to look at our children as something so precious and so important for us to protect that if something unthinkable happens, it causes a great deal of rethinking of who you are as who one is as a person, and what went wrong, and what does all of this mean. Now, in approaching this, I've got to inject myself into it all the way. I'm the child of parents who lost their parents, and in my father's case, almost all of his siblings. He was one of 17 children. And in my mother's case, her parents and her brothers. And in the society around them, everybody had the same story to tell. In the society in which I grew up, in Melbourne, Melbourne's Jewish community, it's, I think, probably the most Holocaust-impacted community in the world. It's a small community. It's a wonderfully high-functional community. It's a wonderful community. I love Melbourne. But I had no difficulty leaving Melbourne because I knew that we were going to Israel for reasons that we shared and that we absolutely understood. But living in a place like Melbourne, you're constantly running into people who lost their first families, people who were left damaged in ways that I don't want to share on this program, but people who I knew growing up who, yes, they had their lives and they lived their lives, and in some cases even lived to old age. but were so destroyed by what they went through in the war because they were such evil people. Oh, did I really say that? Of course they weren't evil. Go explain why all of Europe's Jews were subjected to a process of utter destruction. Now, this isn't a discussion about Yom HaShoah. It is a discussion about how can it be that we have these wonderful values and we do our best to try to live up to the values and we try to engage in chesed, and then somebody comes and gives a smack on the side of the head and suddenly we've lost a child, we've lost our youth, we've lost our education. I mention all of these things only to say that in looking at myself as the father of a child who was murdered when I wasn't there and there's nothing I could do, or at least nothing I did do, to prevent it from happening, I compared myself to my father and my mother and pretty much every adult that I knew growing up in Melbourne. What they lost on any measure was larger, was more pervasive, and came along with years of starvation and losing their education and losing their parents at a young age, losing their youth, losing everything that life has. And here I am trying to make sense of life after the murder of a beautiful child. I'm not minimizing it, but one has to say that there are different scales of loss. And I don't remember ever being struck by the misery of either my parents or the community in which we lived. This was a community which went about the business of marrying, having children, building schools, building careers, moving forward. I don't remember anybody engaging. I mean, it can't be that it was nobody, but I can't remember much focus on hatred, on let's get even with those people down the street. I don't remember any of that because I don't think it was there. When you're focused on your own family and doing good for yourself, for your children, for the community around you, and maybe for other people as well in the name of chesed, you don't have much time or energy or will to engage in these petty things. And then sharp shift over to the right. Look at the woman who murdered my daughter. Famous because she exudes hatred, bigotry of a kind that's almost impossible to describe, surrounded by an entire ecosphere of people who say, yeah, you're right. We've got to do more of this. There's nobody today who ought to be free of the challenge of trying to reconcile those two worlds. That these worlds can't be reconciled with each other. I happen to be standing at something of an intersection between the two worlds. In my own home, I believe we're aspiring to do good things. When I go outside my home and engage with the media and with politicians, I'm dealing with utter evil, irredeemable evil. And instead of the people on the other side saying, oh, you're right, I'm sorry, we didn't see it the right way, now we get it. Of course, that never happens. Instead of all of that, we're dealing with the most incredible ugliness, the stuff that comes in my email, the stuff I see on Twitter. I don't go to Facebook, but I have to imagine that it's not very different from what I've just described. So all of us are called upon to make decisions about which side we're on, and we should not be in any doubt that there are two sides and that there is such a thing as evil, and we have to be ready to stand up against it, because otherwise we get consumed by it.
How can we, the viewers, how can we find out more about the work that you and your wife are doing, whether at the Malki Foundation or trying to bring that terrorist to justice?
Well, first of all, let me say that I very much welcome any interest. Every inquiry will be responded to, and there's lots of situations where we need help. The first thing is to say that the Malki Foundation has a website. It's active in the United Kingdom. It's a registered charity in the United Kingdom. We have a vast team of hundreds of executives. We have a one-man operation based in London. He does a fabulous job. We have volunteers. We have a terrific active board, and we're really efficient and effective. And I hope people will give us their support. Please do go to the Keren Malki website. The address is on the screen. If not for any other reason, at least go there to hear the song that my daughter Malki wrote without ever telling us. It's a song about happiness. It's been now recorded a lot of times, commercially and privately, and there are multiple versions of it on the website. It's a song that really reflects her neshama, her soul. She was just totally optimistic, happy, and empathetic. On a more serious level, we write, my wife and I, a blog. It's called This Ongoing War. We use it to reflect what the name says. We find ourselves in an ongoing war. We began writing it under that name before our daughter's murderer was set free again, and we really have found ourselves in a war that goes on and on and on, and that we can't let go of, because it's all about something that is precious, and that is justice. But at This Ongoing War, we write about the things that we're doing, also about the views that we have about some of the events that are going on around us. And there's also mention there of some steps that any individual anywhere in the world can take in order to give us some support. It does not involve money. If you go to the website, please have a look on the homepage, and you'll see there some pretty clear references to ways in which people can help us, as the Americans say, to move the needle. We need to move public opinion in the United States so that the people who make decisions in the United States, and it's only the United States that matters in this issue, will tell the Jordanians what they must do.
The state of Israel, politicians or the government of the state of Israel can't help, or I don't know if they are helping. We have a peace treaty. We have contacts with Jordan. Have you had any success there?
No.
I'm sorry to hear that. It's also something should come up.
I should add to the no something that people will probably want to wonder about, and I don't want to leave them wondering. I'm a passionate Zionist. I've never regretted for a minute answering my girlfriend's request before we became engaged and married to make a decision about when we're going to make Aliyah. That was a question she asked me on the very first date that we had in New York in 1975. I'm glad we're here. I'm glad that our children live around us. I'm glad we have so many friends here, both native-born Israelis as well as a lot of Olim. It's a rich environment. I know I'm talking to the converted here, Rabbi Kaplan, but there are a lot of people watching who haven't yet had that experience. Israel is a fabulous place. Thank God we have the privilege of being able to raise our families here. And yes, it's not a rose garden, but it's a wonderful place. Politics is where I draw the line. Israeli politics, Tanganyikan politics, politics of almost every country leave me cold. As it happens, because I'm living in Israel and because the government of Israel has a great deal of influence in all of the issues, both good and bad, that affect my life, I'm let's call me disenchanted with the response of Israel's political echelon to our issue, but we're really not looking to the government of Israel to do very much. It really is all focused on the United States, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it, that this is all because my daughter is an American, so my children are American citizens. Malki had American citizenship. So let's let the issue of the state of Israel kind of rest for a more serious and intimate discussion, preferably over drinks, and focus on the things that all of us can do and that are entirely constructive, and they involve bringing the awful orchestrator of the Sbarro massacre to justice in Washington.
I'd like to hear a little bit more, I think we have a little bit more time. So the Malki Foundation is geared, its mission is to help support families with special needs, children in their family environment.
And I'm glad you're giving me the opportunity to expand a little. What would families like that need? Well, the answer is that every Israeli is a member of one of 4 health funds, and the health funds are the mechanism by which the government channels money into the health care of the entire population. You can't not be a member of a health fund. This is a very effective solution when, for argument's sake, it should never happen, but we have a global pandemic. If it would ever happen that we had a global pandemic with a virus that is exacting a terrible price, Israel is a terrific place to be because the entire medical system is concentrated and centralized, and at any given moment, the people who need to know exactly who's sick and who has gotten the vaccination and who needs help and who needs to be put in isolation. It's not a bad solution for really difficult times we should not know from such times. On the other hand, there is a deplorable degree of dependence here in this country on institutionalized residential care for people with special needs. I say deplorable because almost the entire Western world has moved past this model and has moved in the direction of residential care in the community and the support of the family as the agent of care. Israel has somehow missed that train. Malki Foundation stands for the proposition that with the right support, and we aim to give it, the family is the best possible way of taking care of a child with special needs. The family offers love and support and round-the-clock care and a shared view of the future. And I could go on. There's no limit to what the family can do. Why doesn't every family embrace that challenge? A, because it can be very difficult, particularly if you don't have the equipment and the therapies and the support. And B, sometimes you're simply not up to the task. You may be a single parent, or you may be disabled yourself, or there may be more than one child in the family who has the same disability. There are lots of combinations. There's no value judgment in what I'm saying. Under the right circumstances and with the right support, a family will always deliver a better support for a child with special needs than any institution that has ever been invented. To our great misfortune, the Israeli government gives a great deal of support to institutional care and a great deal of neglect and a great deal of frustration to families like mine who are looking to raise our own child, not with somebody else making the decisions, but with help if we can get some help. Our child needs therapy. Our child needs, this has nothing to do with medical care, by the way. The medical care in Israel is world-class and superlative. But the way we deal with the needs of special needs of, and particularly the extreme special needs of children is not a model to be especially proud of. It's got lots of room for improvement. And we see ourselves as part of the improvement. What we want to see is a greater focus on the family, and we call that empowering the family. And that is what we aim to do. We allow the parents to come to us when they've received no at the Kuppah. They go to the Kuppah and they say, my child would really benefit from hydrotherapy. This child has CP or has other physical problems and hydrotherapy. And the answer is either, in many cases, no, when it should be yes. It's clear that in most of those cases where the families are told no, there was a legal obligation to say yes, but you can't stand there and argue with the Kuppah. Or in their great generosity, they'll say, fine, you can have 4 sessions for a year, or 14 sessions for a year, when really what the child needs is 2 or 3 a week. The Malki Foundation takes the opposite view and says, yes, what we do on the basis of money that we raise from generous donors in mostly the United States, Australia, Israel, and the United Kingdom, is to enable the parents to make those decisions themselves and to decide when their child needs to be kept at home with the right kind of equipment, walkers, standers, toilet equipment, and to have non-medical therapies. The 5 that we support, for which we've now funded tens of thousands of such therapies, are physical therapy, speech therapy, horse riding therapy, occupational therapy, and water therapy. And I'm proud that we've been able to say yes when the establishment, the government, has either said no or has not answered. Excuse me. We also have the privilege of sending our own therapists into homes in the far north and the far south of Israel, in what's called in Hebrew the peripheria, which of course means the periphery. In those places, even if we would hand families a blank check to pay for the therapies that their child needs, they can't find the therapists. And our model in our program called Therapists on Wheels could be and should be run by the government of Israel. And eventually, I believe, will be run by the government of Israel. But in the meantime, it's up to us to show that this is the right way to go, that it works, that it's efficient, and that it really changes lives. And that's really what Malki's life, before it was taken from us, stood for. Help other people get to a better life simply by giving them a hand.
All right, so I think we have to wrap this up. We're both here in Israel, Arnold and myself, but I think we all know around the world, we know that the UK, the United Kingdom, is in mourning for the passing of Prince Philip. The Queen has declared, I believe, a week of mourning. I believe Prince Philip, of course, he'll leave a big hole in the family, in the hearts of the royal family, and therefore will affect the whole kingdom, the whole country of the United Kingdom. I believe he has the place in fame of being the first royal to visit Israel. I think it was in 1994. I believe he came to visit the grave of his mother, Princess Alice, who is considered a righteous Gentile, Chasidat Umot Ha'olam, because during World War II, she hid Jews in her home I believe in Athens or in Greece, wherever she was serving at the time. So I'd like to express, especially all the viewers, most of them of the United Synagogue in the United Kingdom, but we all are sorry for his passing and for the pain it will cause to the family and to the United Kingdom. Also, it is Rosh Chodesh. We're coming up to, of course, soon Yom Hazikaron, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Lag BaOmer, and then, of course, leading up to Shavuot at the end of the Omer. The things that you've said, Arnold, and the way your family has behaved since the terrible tragedy, the way you've looked to find a way to overcome this great tragedy, this tragic event of losing a daughter murdered senselessly, and still seeing the culprit, the terrorist, the mastermind, gloating about it, but that you've managed to come forward and look for ways to find some way of continuing to be creative and to commemorate her to create a legacy of Malki, beautiful Malki, or beautiful Neshama. And I think the Jewish way is chesed, doing more for others. And that's things that you've spoken about, because you said that chesed is such a unique and characteristic of Jewish faith and Jewish belief and Jewish practice. The fact that we believe that somebody who does chesed, more than they're giving, they're getting. And I believe the idea that we mentioned before of people that have gone through such great tragedy and people that are feeling depressed have to remember there's a lot of beauty in this world. It is sometimes hard to see, but we should be optimistic. And what you've done, spreading more light, more love, and more chesed is truly inspirational. And I think it's an example and something that we'll all take, anybody that's listened to you and seen this interview this evening. I'd like to thank David for organizing it, you, Arnold, and the family for sharing this. And God willing, we'll see justice, and we'll all see a world full of more health, that we'll all be past the virus, and a world where truly people of all races, all religions, and of big differences are living at peace and looking to do more and more chesed. Thank you, Arnold, and thank you everyone for viewing it. Till next time, US TV.